Know your place. You pour coffee. You don't question men like me. He said it loud enough for the whole restaurant to hear. Then he grabbed her wrist. The plates hit the floor. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. Because in Cedar Ridge, Grant Holloway didn't just own a restaurant, he owned the silence of an entire town. Until the front door opened. If this is your first time here, welcome. And if you've been with us before, you already know we don't do halfway stories on this channel. Hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now stay with me all the way to the end, because what happens next will stay with you. Brooke Dalton had been carrying trays since she was 19 years old. Not because she loved it, not because she couldn't do anything else. She carried trays because a tray was honest. You picked up the weight, you moved it from one place to another, and at the end of the shift, you knew exactly what you'd done and who you'd fed. There was a dignity in that which a lot of people who'd never done it wouldn't understand. She was 34 now, and she'd spent the last 3 of those years working the Sunday lunch rush at Holloway's Roadhouse, the biggest sit-down restaurant in Cedar Ridge, Tennessee, which was itself a town small enough that everybody knew your name, your business, and which side of the county's invisible fault line your family had always stood on. Grant Holloway's family had always stood at the top. His grandfather built the original Roadhouse in 1962. His father expanded it into a regional landmark. Grant inherited the whole operation at 27, and somewhere between inheriting it and running it, he'd also inherited the idea that the people who worked for him existed in a somewhere below furniture, useful when you needed them, replaceable when you didn't, and absolutely not entitled to opinions. Brooke had known that about him from the beginning. Most of the staff had. You learned it in the first 2 weeks, usually from someone older who pulled you aside in the break room and said, very quietly, just do your job. Don't ask questions. And whatever you do, don't let him think you're smarter than him. It was a survival strategy, not a life philosophy. But in Cedar Ridge, where Grant Holloway held business licenses, political connections, and the ear of the county sheriff, a man named Dale Pruitt, who had known Grant since elementary school, survival was the best most people felt they could manage. Brooke had followed the strategy for 3 years until the Sunday everything broke. The lunch rush that day was the kind that physically hurt. Every table full, the wait list backed up to the parking lot, the kitchen running 15 minutes behind, and 3 of the wait staff down sick. Brooke had been on her feet since 9 in the morning, and by 1 in the afternoon, she'd covered 4 tables that weren't hers, talked a customer out of leaving twice, and personally carried a birthday cake from the walk-in cooler to table 12 without dropping it or setting it on fire, which felt like the most professional thing she'd accomplished all week. She was crossing the dining room with a tray of sweet teas when Corey, one of the younger busboys, touched her elbow. He's asking for you. Corey didn't say the name. He didn't have to. He just tipped his chin toward the back of the restaurant, toward the private corner booth that Grant Holloway kept reserved for himself every Sunday. He said, now, I've got drinks for 6, I know. He said, now. Brooke looked at Corey's face. He was 20 years old, and at that moment, he looked 12 that specific. Wide-eyed 12 that happened, when a kid realized the adults around him were afraid too. Tell Denise to take the sweet teas, Brooke said. I'll be right back. She set the tray down at the service station, pulled her order pad from her apron, and walked toward the back of the restaurant. Grant Holloway was sitting with 2 men. She recognized Phil Garrett, who ran one of the county's largest construction companies, and a third man she'd never seen before, in a blazer that didn't fit right, and the quiet expression of someone paid to witness things. Grant had his usual Sunday setup, half a prime rib, a bourbon and water, and the particular kind of relaxed posture that belonged to men who'd never once worried about making rent. He didn't look up when she arrived at the table. Brooke. He said it the way you'd say the name of a tool you were picking up. Sit down. I can't sit down, Grant. The floor's packed. I didn't ask about the floor. He looked up then. Sit down. She sat. He reached inside his jacket and produced a single sheet of paper, folded once, and set it on the table in front of her. He slid it toward her with 2 fingers. Then he set a pen on top of it. "That's a statement," he said. "It says that the staff, of their own free will, agreed to a voluntary reduction in overtime compensation during the first quarter. It names 8 employees. You're one of them. You're going to sign it." Brooke didn't touch the paper. She looked at it the way you looked at something you already knew was wrong before you even read it. "Grant, it's a formality," he said. "The county's doing a routine payroll review. Somebody put together a complaint. This clears it up." "A complaint about what?" "About overtime, which I already told you the staff agreed to adjust. This just documents it." She looked at him. Then she looked at the paper. Because here was the thing about that statement, the thing that Grant Holloway apparently believed she was too tired or too scared or too simple to understand. None of those 8 employees had agreed to anything. Brooke knew because she'd been one of them. She'd worked 61 hours one week in February and been paid for 40. She'd asked about the difference twice. The first time, the shift manager told her there'd been a scheduling error and it would be corrected. The second time, the shift manager wasn't there anymore. Neither were the hours. "I'm not signing that," she said. Grant set down his bourbon glass very slowly. "I'm sorry I said I'm not signing it." Her voice was steady. She was surprised by that. "It isn't accurate." "Brooke," he leaned forward. The 2 men across from him went very still. "I need you to understand something. This is not a negotiation. This is a business document that protects the restaurant and protects the staff. And I need your signature on it by the time this lunch service ends. You need my signature on a statement saying I agreed to give up overtime I worked and never got paid for." "You agreed." "I didn't agree to anything." "Grant." She pushed the paper back toward him. "I asked twice about my February hours and got no answer." "That's not an agreement. That's you not answering me." The dining room around them was doing that thing dining rooms do when something goes wrong. The sound didn't stop, but it reorganized. Conversations dropped in volume. Chairs shifted. People pretended to look at menus while looking at the corner booth. Grant Holloway noticed. He noticed that the room was watching, and in the specific, cold way of men who were used to winning in front of an audience, his face changed. "You want to do this here?" he said. "Not a question. I don't want to do this at all. I want to go take care of my tables." "Your tables." He said it with a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "You've got 6 tables and a job because I say you do. And you're going to sit there and tell me." "I'm going to tell you I'm not signing a false statement." She stood up. "If the county wants to talk to me, I'll talk to the county directly." She was already turning away from the table when she heard his chair scrape back. She didn't make it one full step. Grant Holloway came around the edge of the booth so fast that the movement startled her into stopping, and then his hand closed around her wrist, not grabbing, not immediately, but the way you grip something before you decide what to do with it, with the particular confidence of a man who had never once been told no by someone he employed, and then everything happened in about 4 seconds that felt, later, like 4 separate years. He said, "Know your place. You pour coffee. You don't question men like me." She pulled back. He didn't let go. She pulled again, harder, and his grip tightened. And then she twisted, and the full tray on the service station behind her caught her hip as she stepped back. And 12 plates, 4 glasses, 2 dessert spoons, and approximately $40 worth of unserved food hit the floor of Holloway's Roadhouse with a sound like the world cracking open. And the restaurant went completely, absolutely silent. Nobody moved. That was the thing that Brooke would think about later, in the long, quiet weeks after everything changed. Not what Grant did, not what she said, but the moment of absolute stillness that spread through that dining room like something solid. 47 people, customers and employees both, all frozen in the particular kind of collective paralysis that happens when a room full of people witnesses something wrong and can't figure out how to make their bodies go. She stood there with her wrist throbbing, and Grant Holloway between her and the rest of the restaurant, and she looked out at the faces she knew. Denise Marks, who'd been working the kitchen at Holloway's for 11 years. Corey, Linda, the senior waitress who trained half the current staff, Ray, the daytime manager, who was standing by the host station with his hand on the wall like he needed it for balance. Nobody moved. She understood why. She understood it the same way she understood all of it, because Grant Holloway had a lease on the building that housed the only decent pharmacy in the county. Because his cousin sat on the planning commission. Because Dale Pruitt, the county sheriff, went hunting with him twice a year and had for the last decade. Because Cedar Ridge was a small town with a small economy and most of the people in that room needed their jobs more than they needed to be brave. She understood all of that. It didn't make the silence feel any better. Grant looked around the room, slowly, deliberately, letting everyone see him not caring about what he'd just done, and then he looked back at her. "You're fired," he said. "Clean out your locker. I'll mail your last check." Then the front door of Holloway's Roadhouse opened. The sound of it a specific, heavy thud that the original door always made. Since 2019, slightly warped through the silence like something thrown. 3 men came in off the street. The one in front was maybe 50, maybe a little older, with the kind of build that came from working rather than gyms wide through the chest. Easy in the shoulders, carrying himself in that particular way that people who had spent a long time making difficult decisions in difficult rooms sometimes carried themselves. Unhurried, centered, completely present. He wore a leather vest over a dark thermal, and on the back of that vest was a patch that anyone from Cedar Ridge or the surrounding 4 counties would have recognized without having to think about it. Hell's Angels, the Diamond. Cedar Ridge Charter. Wade Stone Garrett was president of the Cedar Ridge chapter, and he had been for 11 years. And in that time, the chapter had developed a reputation that was complicated enough that most people in the county held 2 separate and contradictory beliefs about them simultaneously. That they were dangerous and that they were fair. Neither belief was entirely accurate. Both were close enough to true to explain why the room reacted the way it did when Wade Garrett walked in, which was by doing exactly nothing in a very loud way. Wade didn't rush. He stepped inside, let the door close behind him, and took in the room the way a man did when he'd spent enough years reading rooms to know that the most useful thing to do first was simply observe. His eyes moved from the broken plates on the floor to the service station, to Brooke's posture to her wrist, to Grant Holloway standing 3 feet in front of her. He took about 4 seconds to read all of that. Then he walked across the dining room toward them. He didn't say anything until he was close enough that he didn't have to project. He stopped next to Brooke, not in front of her, not behind her, but beside her, shoulder aligned with her shoulder, and he looked at Grant Holloway, and he said quietly, "You okay?" He was talking to Brooke. Grant made a sound. "This is a private. I didn't ask you." Wade said it without looking at him. He was still looking at Brooke. "You okay?" Brooke realized her hand was shaking. She pressed it flat against her apron. "I'm standing." "That's not what I asked." She looked up Wade Garrett, whom she knew the way most people in Cedar Ridge knew him by reputation more than personally. She knew he was fair. She knew he was serious. She knew that if he'd walked into the middle of this, he'd walked in with his eyes open. "He grabbed my wrist," she said. "He was trying to make me sign something." "All right." Wade finally looked at Grant. His expression didn't change. "I'm going to ask you to step back." Grant Holloway was not a small man, and he had not spent his entire adult life being told what to do by other men. And so for a moment, a visible, almost theatrical moment, he held his ground. Let everyone see him holding it. Let everyone see him calculating. Then he took 1 step back. "This is my restaurant," Grant said. "I know it is," Wade said. "I eat here most Sundays." "Then you know. I know a woman is standing here with a bruised wrist, and you're standing between her and the rest of the room." Wade turned to Brooke. "Do you want me to call the police?" And there it was. The question that nobody else in that dining room, not one of the 47 people who'd been watching, had thought to ask. Grant laughed. It came out short and hard, and slightly too loud, the laugh of a man who used his laugh as a tool. "Go ahead and call Dale. Tell him I said hello." "I didn't ask about Dale," Wade said. He didn't say it as a challenge. He said it exactly the way he'd said the first part, patient, level, like none of this was complicated, because for him none of it was. I asked the woman. Brooke looked at him. Then she looked at the room, at Denise, at Corey, at Ray, at Linda, at every frightened face aimed at her from every corner of that dining room. She thought about the piece of paper Grant had slid across the table to her. The one that said 8 employees had voluntarily given up wages they'd actually worked for and never been paid. She thought about the elderly waitress named Carol, who'd been forced to repay money she'd never stolen. She thought about the 2 months she'd spent quietly photographing documents on her phone because she'd understood, somewhere deep in her gut, that what was happening in this restaurant was not just wrong, it was criminal, and someone needed to be ready to prove it. She thought about all of that. And then she stopped thinking and started talking. Yes, Brooke said. Call them. And she looked around the room, met Denise's eyes, held them. Don't let anyone clean up this room before they get here. The patrol car arrived 11 minutes later. 2 deputies. Brooke knew one of them, a woman named Angela Reeves, who'd gone to high school with Brooke's older sister. Angela came in first, took in the scene, and Brooke watched her make the calculations quickly and without drama. Broken dishes, woman with a visibly bruised wrist, large man with a history of political connections, 3 men in Hell's Angels, cuts standing to the side. Grant Holloway went to Angela immediately. He had the particular social ease of a man who knew how to talk to authority because he'd spent his whole life adjacent to it. Angela. Thank God. There was an accident. One of my employees had a breakdown. She was already being let go for cause, and he grabbed her wrist, Corey said. Everyone looked at Corey. Corey was 20 years old, and he had about 6 weeks of job experience in this place. And he was standing there with his busboy apron still on, visibly terrified, absolutely determined. I was standing right there. He grabbed her, and she pulled back, and that's why the plates went. Grant turned and looked at Corey the way you looked at something you intended to deal with later. Corey didn't look away. Angela turned to Brooke. Ma'am, can you tell me what happened? Brooke told her. She kept it tight, the statement Grant wanted her to sign, her refusal, his reaction, the grab. She didn't editorialize. She described. By the time she finished, Grant was already offering a different version. Emotional employee. Voluntary separation. Plates fell because she lost her footing. Wristwell. Who could really say how that happened? Could have been anything. Angela was writing everything down. And Brooke could see the weight of the room on her, the specific weight of being a deputy in a county where the sheriff and this man had known each other for 30 years. And then Wade Garrett said, there's video. The room shifted. Grant said, what? A truck driver in the lot had a dash cam. Wade said it like he was mentioning the weather. He came in about 30 seconds after it happened and showed me the footage. Camera picks up through the front window. It doesn't get everything angles wrong, but it gets him cornering her before the plates went. Grant stopped himself. I've already sent copies to 4 places, Wade said. So, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Angela looked at Grant. Then she looked at Brooke's wrist. Then she looked at her notepad. Mr. Holloway, she said carefully, I'm going to need you to wait here while I call this in. The dining room emptied slowly, the way water drains reluctantly, in stages, with customers glancing back over their shoulders as they left. A few employees drifted toward the break room. Grant's 2 friends in the corner booth quietly gathered their coats and disappeared without saying goodbye to him, which told Brooke something important about the kind of loyalty Grant had cultivated. Denise found her near the service station, now technically a crime scene, that nobody was allowed to touch. How's your wrist? It's fine. It's not fine. It's already turning purple. It's fine enough. Brooke looked at the older woman. Denise Marks had been at this restaurant longer than anyone, had outlasted 3 different ownership configurations, had trained more staff than she could count, and carried 11 years of institutional knowledge about exactly how Holloway's Roadhouse really operated. How much did you hear? Enough. Denise lowered her voice. He's going to try to make this about you. I know. Dale Pruitt is going to get a phone call in the next 20 minutes. I know that too. Denise studied her. You're not scared. I'm terrified, Brooke said. That's different than not scared. Wade came and stood near them. He didn't insert himself into the conversation. He just stood close enough to be present. The way you stood when you wanted someone to know you were there without making them feel watched. The deputy's outside, he said. She's making calls. How much trouble is that video actually going to be for him? Brooke asked. Depends on who pulls the report. Wade looked toward the front windows. On its own, maybe nothing. Cedar Ridge, your sheriff's situation, maybe nothing. So then what? He looked at her. How much do you know about what's actually been happening in this place? Brooke was quiet for a moment. She looked at Denise. Denise gave her a look that said, your call. More than he thinks I know, Brooke said. Wade held that for a second. Then we need to talk. Not here. Not tonight either, Brooke said. I need. She paused. She needed to think. She needed to figure out what came next. She needed to understand what she just set into motion by refusing to sign that piece of paper, by saying yes to that phone call, by standing here while a man who had controlled this town for years called her fired and expected the world to rearrange itself accordingly. I need tonight. Okay, Wade said. He didn't push. He reached into his jacket and held out a card. It had a phone number on it and nothing else. When you're ready. She took the card. Grant Holloway did not get arrested that Sunday. He gave a statement, cooperated completely, spoke to Angela Reeves with the patient tolerance of a man being inconvenienced by a process he found mildly amusing, and by 6 o'clock he was gone. The incident report was filed. Brooke was listed as the complainant. Her termination was listed as voluntary separation pending investigation, which was language she was fairly certain Grant's lawyer had suggested over the phone within the hour. By Monday morning, the word around Cedar Ridge was already taking shape, not by what happened, but by who was doing the shaping. Grant had gotten there first, the way he always got there first, and the version circulating was unstable waitress, bikers making trouble, accident that got blown out of proportion. Brooke heard it at the pharmacy. She heard it at the gas station. She heard it from her landlord, Terry Bassett, who called her Monday evening and asked her very carefully, in the particular way of men who were being told what to say, whether she was planning to make a situation out of this. My wrist is bruised. Terry, I understand that, Brooke. My wrist is bruised because my employer grabbed me in front of 47 people. Sure, I just want to make sure. I'll let you know if I'm planning to make a situation out of it. She hung up. She sat in her apartment that night with her phone on the table and the card Wade Garrett had given her beside it. And she thought about all of it, about what she'd collected, about the photographs on her phone, 342 of them, taken over 18 months on nights when she stayed late to help the bookkeeper and found herself alone with files she wasn't supposed to look at, about the things she'd found that she hadn't gone looking for and then couldn't unknow. Altered timesheets. 37 of them that she'd photographed, clearly edited after the fact, reducing hours that workers had clocked in and out for. Missing tip records from the communal pool money that should have been distributed and had instead gone somewhere she couldn't trace but could identify by the gap. False health code complaints, 2 of them filed against competing restaurants in the county, complaints she'd found reference to in an email. Grant had CC'd to the bookkeeper by mistake, in which he discussed keeping the pressure on in ways that were clearly not about food safety. And the bigger thing, the thing that had taken her weeks to understand once she started following it. Campaign donations disguised as consulting fees, feeding into county officials' accounts through a shell company registered to a man named Holloway. First name Marcus, which was Grant's brother's name. Public money, infrastructure funds, a maintenance contract for the county fairgrounds that had been renewed automatically for 8 years without competitive bidding. She'd been 17 years old the first time she saw someone get away with something because they knew the right people. A kid in her class. Minor thing. But she'd watched it happen and understood. The rules were real for most people and optional for some people. And the trick was figuring out which was which. She'd spent 18 months figuring out which Grant Holloway was. She'd already known the answer, before she started. She'd collected the proof because knowing wasn't enough. You had to be able to show it. She picked up her phone and dialed the number on the card. Wade picked up on the second ring. "I'm ready to talk," she said. "Where are you?" Home. A pause. "Don't come here alone. And not at the roadhouse. Somewhere public." "The diner on Route 9, she said. 7 tomorrow morning. I'll be there." She set the phone down. Outside her window, Cedar Ridge was quiet, the particular quiet of a small town at night, where everyone knew each other, and almost nobody said what they actually meant. And a woman with a bruised wrist and 342 photographs on her phone sat alone in her apartment and tried to figure out whether the things she'd spent 18 months building was strong enough to survive what was about to happen to it. She didn't sleep much, but she'd stopped expecting to. The diner on Route 9 opened at 6, which meant by 7 it had already cleared the first wave of breakfast traffic and settled into the quiet middle hour when the regulars had gone and the next crowd hadn't arrived. Brooke got there first and took the table by the back wall, facing the door, which was either good instinct or paranoia, and at this point, she wasn't sure it mattered which. Wade came in alone. He was wearing regular clothes, dark jacket, work boots, and without cut, he looked like a man who worked with his hands and thought with his head, which was maybe what he actually was. He sat down. The waitress brought coffee without being asked. "I'm not going to ask you what you have," Wade said, "but I need you to understand what he's going to do before you die." "Tell me." "He's going to build a story," Wade said. "He's already started. By the end of this week, what happened yesterday is going to be a biker incident that an unstable employee used to get out of a disciplinary meeting. That's the version he's giving people. By next week, that's the version most people in this county will have heard. I know that. What you have, whatever it is, it needs to go somewhere that isn't here. Somewhere he can't reach it. I know that too." He looked at her. "Then what do you need from me?" She thought about it. Really thought about it, the way she'd been thinking about it all night. Because here was the other truth of the situation, the one that ran parallel to everything else. Wade Garrett and the Hells Angels were not a neutral force. They were not law enforcement. They were not investigators. They were a motorcycle club with their own history, their own code, their own way of handling things, and whatever she said in this diner in the next half hour was going to determine whether she was asking for help or just trading one set of complications for another. "I need people to stay safe," she said. "There are other employees involved. Denise, a kid named Evan who kept records because I asked him to. If Grant figures out who's been documenting things, those people are in danger. All right, I need the evidence to get to someone who can actually use it. Federal level, not county. Dale Pruitt isn't going to investigate Grant Holloway. He's been protecting him for years." "I know someone," Wade said. "Federal. Not a favor, a proper referral. But it takes time." "How much time?" "Enough that Grant is going to come at you before it happens." He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "When he does, and he will, you need to decide in advance how you want to handle it. Because how you handle it is going to affect everything that comes after." "What do you mean?" "I mean, the club can make sure nobody touches your people. We can make sure the evidence doesn't disappear. We can be visible enough that he knows there are eyes on him." He paused. "But we don't threaten him. We don't touch him. We don't make his decisions for him or yours for you. That's not how this works." Brooke looked at him. "Why are you drawing that line?" He was quiet for a moment. Outside, a truck went by on Route 9, shaking the window slightly. "I had a sister," he said. "Younger. She worked for a man like Grant Holloway for about a year. Different state, smaller situation. Same basic math, he had power. She didn't. She was trying to keep her head down." He turned his coffee cup a quarter rotation, not looking at her. "I knew something was wrong. I thought staying quiet would keep her out of it. I thought if I made noise it would get worse." "Did it get worse?" "She left the state. She's okay now. But she left because nobody made enough noise soon enough, and she spent 2 years rebuilding from nothing." He looked up. "I've regretted it for 30 years. I'm not real interested in making the same call twice." Brooke held that information, turned it over, felt the weight of it. There was something real in it. something that didn't have the texture of a performance. Okay, she said. Okay, okay. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a folded envelope inside it, a USB drive and a printed list of contents. This is a partial copy of what I have. Not everything, but enough to show someone what they're looking at. Wade took the envelope. He didn't open it. I need you to understand something, Brooke said. Everything that happens from here, that's my decision. Not the club's, mine. Yes. You don't move on Grant without talking to me first. You don't decide what the resolution looks like. You protect people and preserve evidence and help me get to the right investigators. That's it. That's it, Wade agreed. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Then we have a deal, she said. She picked up her coffee. Outside, Cedar Ridge was waking up. Somewhere across town, in a private booth at a roadhouse that bore his family's name, Grant Holloway was likely already on the phone, already orchestrating, already confident that the woman he'd fired yesterday would realize by the end of the week how small she actually was. He had no idea what she'd spent 18 months building. He had no idea who was sitting beside her now. And in 342 photographs on her phone, and a USB drive sitting in a leather-vested man's jacket pocket, the beginning of his unraveling had already been assembled, piece by piece, by the woman he'd told to know her place. She knew her place. She'd known it all along. She'd just been waiting for the right moment to say so out loud. Wade dropped her off 2 blocks from her apartment, which was her idea, not his. She didn't want anyone to see the Hell's Angels patch in front of her building at 7:30 in the morning and draw conclusions before she'd had time to build a story that could survive them. Small town logic. You controlled what you could. She was halfway up the stairs when her phone rang. Denise, she picked up before the second ring. You okay? I'm fine. Denise's voice had that particular tightness that happened when she was trying to sound calm about something that wasn't calm. Grant called a staff meeting this morning, 6:30. I wasn't invited, which means it was for the people he thinks he can still manage. What did he say? Linda told me. He told them you'd been caught stealing, not overtime stealing. Product. Said he'd been building a case for weeks, and yesterday was just the moment it came to a head. Said the biker thing was a misunderstanding that got out of hand. Brooke sat down on the stairs. She didn't say anything for a moment. You still there? Denise said. I'm here. She pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose. How many people believed him? Hard to say. Some of them want to. Easier to believe that than to believe he grabbed a woman in front of the whole dining room because she wouldn't sign something. How many people actually saw it happen? Everybody in that room saw it happen. Brooke, that's not what I mean. How many of them know what they saw versus how many are already convincing themselves they don't remember it clearly? Denise was quiet. Right, Brooke said. Linda didn't believe him, Denise said. Corey definitely didn't. There are maybe 4 or 5 others who I think are still thinking straight. The rest, she paused. The rest work for him. Most of them have for years. It's hard to see clearly when your rent depends on not seeing. I know. Brooke stood up. Don't do anything yet. Don't say anything at the restaurant. I need you to act like nothing's changed. For how long, I don't know yet. A few days, maybe more. Brooke. Denise's voice dropped. He told Ray to pull your personnel file this morning. The whole thing. He's building something. Let him build it. She said it with more steadiness than I've been building something too. She hung up and stood on the staircase for a long moment, holding the phone against her chest, listening to the building around her, the upstairs neighbor's television. Somebody's dryer running 2 floors down, the particular hum of ordinary life, going on around a situation that had stopped being ordinary. Then she went upstairs, opened her laptop, and started making copies. She had 342 photographs on her phone. She'd told Wade that the night before, but saying the number out loud didn't fully convey what they actually represented: 18 months of careful, methodical work done in stolen minutes at the end of long shifts, photographing documents in the half-dark of the back office while the restaurant wound down around her. She'd started doing it by accident, or close enough to accident that the distinction didn't much matter. It was February of the year before last. She'd been helping the bookkeeper, a quiet woman in her 60s named Ruth, who'd been doing Holloway's books since Grant's father ran the place, and who moved through the office with the particular care of someone who'd seen too much and made peace with knowing exactly how. Much of what she saw she was allowed to say out loud. Ruth had asked Brooke to help reorganize a set of old receipt files that had gotten mixed up during a software transition. It was tedious work sorting by date, refiling, basic clerical stuff. And Brooke had been doing it for about 40 minutes when she found the first one. A timesheet. One of the cooks, a man named Bobby Salter, who'd left the restaurant 6 months earlier. The sheet showed his hours for a 2-week period in October, and the numbers had been altered clearly, plainly, in a different ink than the original entries, changing 61 hours to 48. She'd held it up and looked at it and thought, that's not a mistake. You don't accidentally change 61 to 48 in a different pen on a payroll document. She'd put it back. She'd gone home. She'd told herself she wasn't sure what she'd seen. Then she came back the next week and found 3 more. After that, it stopped being an accident. She'd developed a system. She photographed only what she could prove was anomalous, not everything. Not at random, but specific documents with specific irregularities that told a story when placed next to each other. She organized them on a drive she kept at her sister's house in the next county. She kept notes in a plain notebook that she never brought to work. She told no one except Denise, and she told Denise only enough to make sure Denise understood why certain conversations needed to stay inside certain walls. And she'd found Evan. Evan Marsh was 23. New to Cedar Ridge, working his second job in the restaurant industry, and smart enough to be dangerous if anyone pointed him in the right direction. He'd come to Brooke 4 months into his time at Holloway's with a question about why his direct deposit always came in slightly different from his expected hours, and she'd looked at him for a long time before deciding he was asking because he was bothered, not because he was testing her. She'd explained it carefully. Not all of it. Enough of it. He'd started keeping his own records after that, his hours, the hours of the people on his shift, tip amounts that came in versus tip amounts that were distributed. He kept them in a notebook at home, dated and initialed. He didn't tell anyone he was doing it except Brooke. 342 photographs, Evan's notebooks, Ruth's silence, which was its own kind of testimony if you knew how to read it. That was what Grant Holloway had accidentally activated when he'd slid that statement across the table on a Sunday afternoon and told her to sign it. By Wednesday, Grant had found a different gear. Brooke's landlord called again, not carefully this time, not the polite hedging of the first call. Terry Bassett said, directly, that he was reviewing her lease and had found several potential violations, and that he'd appreciate it if she'd come in to discuss them at her earliest convenience, which was the language of a man who'd been told what outcome he was expected to reach and was working backward from it. Tell me one, Brooke said. I'm sorry? Tell me one lease violation. Specifically, a pause. There are several potential. Terry, tell me one. Another pause, longer. This would be easier in person. I know it would, she said, because you don't actually have any, and you'd rather I didn't have a recording of this conversation. She heard him stop breathing. I'm going to assume this is about Grant, she said. And I'm going to assume he's put pressure on you that you feel like you can't push back against. I'm not going to hold that against you because I understand the position you're in. But I need you to understand something, Terry. Whatever he's told you, whatever he's promised you or threatened you with, it's temporary. What I have isn't. She hung up. She sat very still for about 30 seconds. Then she called Wade. He's moving faster than I expected, she said when he picked up. What happened? She told him about the landlord call, about the staff meeting, about the personnel file. Wade was quiet, long enough that she thought the call had dropped. Then he said, he knows. Knows what? That someone inside the restaurant was copying documents. He may not know it's you specifically yet, but he knows it happened. That's why he wanted you to sign the statement. He was trying to get ahead of an audit that someone tipped him off about, and when you refused, he panicked. That landed differently than she expected. He was already scared, she said slowly. He was already scared, Wade confirmed. Which makes him more dangerous, not less. Because scared people make worse decisions. Because scared people with power don't make worse decisions, they make faster ones. He's not thinking about next year. He's thinking about next week. She closed her laptop. What do I do? You get the evidence out of your possession and into the hands of someone he can't pressure. Today, not tomorrow. You said you knew someone federal. I do. Her name is Rachel Moreno. She works out of the regional field office. She's been looking at county-level corruption cases in this part of the state for about 2 years. And she's not from here, which matters. He paused. She's not going to move on a USB drive and somebody's word. She needs to see what you have and decide whether it's worth opening. How do I reach her without Grant finding out? Through me. I already made contact this morning. Brooke paused. You were that sure I'd need it? I was that sure he'd push you this fast. His voice was steady. I've been watching men like Grant Holloway react to losing control for a long time. They don't take a breath. They accelerate. She thought about that. When? She can meet Thursday. Not in Cedar Ridge. There's a federal building in the next county, Harlan. She'll meet you there. Okay. Brooke pressed a hand flat on the table. There's something else. The audit he was trying to get ahead of, do you know where it's coming from? State Labor Board. Somebody filed a complaint about wage theft. We don't know who. I might know who, Brooke said quietly. She was thinking about Ruth. Ruth, who had worked Holloway's books since Grant's father was alive. Ruth, who moved through the back office like someone carrying weight she'd learned to live with. Ruth, who had never once said anything directly to Brooke about what she knew but who had, on 3 separate occasions, left files slightly more accessible than they needed to be. Is she safe? Wade asked. Whoever it is? I don't know. Brooke stood up. I need to find out. Ruth Hadley lived alone in a small house on the west end of town, which Brooke drove to that afternoon without calling first, because she didn't know who else might be listening to Ruth's phone. Ruth opened the door before Brooke knocked. She'd been watching from the window. She was 64 years old and looked, in that moment, like someone who had been carrying a specific weight for a long time and had just been told the thing she was carrying might finally matter. Come in, Ruth said. She already had the coffee made. They sat at Ruth's kitchen table, and for a moment neither of them said anything, the way people sometimes don't when there's a lot to say, and no obvious place to start. You filed the complaint, Brooke said. Not a question. Ruth looked at her. I filed it anonymously, I know. Did Grant figure out it was you? I don't know. Maybe. Ruth turned her coffee cup. He called me Sunday night, after what happened at the restaurant. He didn't say anything about the complaint. Specifically, he asked if I was okay with everything, which is how he talks when he's checking to see if you're with him or not. What did you tell him? I told him I was fine. Are you fine? Ruth's mouth pressed together. I've been working for that family for 23 years. I've watched Grant turn something his father built honestly into something very different. I've recorded things I couldn't prove. I've filed things I should have filed 10 years ago. She looked at Brooke directly. I am not fine. I'm relieved. Brooke reached across the table and covered the older woman's hand with her own. I need you to know something, Brooke said. If this goes where I think it's going, and I think it's going further than either of us planned, you're going to be named as a potential witness. He's going to come at you. I know. It could get bad. Brooke. Ruth looked at her with the patient directness of a woman who had survived difficult things by understanding them clearly. I'm 64 years old. I live alone. I have a pension from a system that doesn't depend on Grant Holloway, and I have a copy of every significant document I've processed for that restaurant for the last 8 years, stored somewhere. He will never find it. She picked up her coffee. He can come at me. Brooke sat back. I need whatever you have, she said. A full copy. Not for me, for a federal investigator who's meeting me Thursday. Ruth stood up. She went to the back bedroom and came back 3 minutes later with a manila envelope, thick with folded papers. She set it on the table. I made this 2 weeks ago, she said, when the audit notice came. Brooke looked at the envelope. You were ready. I've been ready for 2 years. Ruth sat back down. I was just waiting for someone who'd decided to actually go. The retaliation against Evan happened Thursday morning, before Brooke even left Cedar Ridge for the federal building in Harlan. Her phone rang at 6:45. Unknown number. She almost didn't pick up. Brooke. It was Corey. He sounded the way people sounded when they'd been up all night. They arrested Evan. She gripped the phone. What? Last night. Late. 2 deputies came to the restaurant and said they'd found missing cash from the register in his locker. His voice dropped. Brooke. Evan would never. He's been keeping records because you asked him to. He would never. I know that. She was already moving. Was it Dale Pruitt's people? One of them was the deputy from Sunday. The one who took the report about your wrist. She stopped in the middle of pulling on her jacket. The deputy from Sunday, the one who'd been present when Grant was there, when Grant's version of events had been floating around, when the report had been taken in a county where the sheriff was Grant's oldest friend. Where is he now, she said. Which facility? County lockup. Corey said his mom is there. His voice cracked slightly. She's pretty upset. I'm going to take care of it. She said it before she'd fully decided how. Don't go to the restaurant today. Call in sick. Don't talk to anyone you don't trust about this. Brooke, trust me. She called Wade before she was done with Corey. Evan Marsh, she said the moment he picked up. They arrested him last night. Planted cash in his locker. A beat. I'll find him. County lockup. I know where it is. His voice was already moving. That specific transition from stillness to motion that she was starting to recognize in him. Get to Harlan. Don't cancel the meeting. I can't just Brooke. He cut through it cleanly. If you cancel on Moreno, we lose the thread. You getting to that meeting is the most important thing that happens today. I'll handle Evan. She stood in her apartment, jacket half on, phone pressed to her ear. She wanted to argue. She understood he was right. Don't let anything happen to him, she said. Nothing's going to happen to him. She finished putting on her jacket. Special Agent Rachel Moreno was not what Brooke expected, which was probably intentional. She was about 40, with short hair and the particular stillness of someone who'd spent years listening to people tell her things they'd never told anyone, evaluating whether those things were true, and using that evaluation to make decisions with real consequences. She wore no jewelry. Her office, a borrowed conference room in the federal building in Harlan, had a window, a table, 4 chairs, and nothing else except a yellow legal pad and a cup of coffee that had gone cold. She looked at Brooke the way investigators looked at sources. Not suspicious, not credulous, but measuring. Present. Tell me what you have, she said. Not the story first. The evidence. Brooke set the USB drive on the table. She set Ruth's manila envelope beside it. She set a printed index she'd made the night before, 12 pages, organized by category, cross-referenced by date. Moreno picked up the index first. She read it without expression. She turned pages slowly. When she got to page 7, she stopped. She looked up at Brooke. The shell company. Marcus Holloway. Grant's brother. Registered in a different county. The county maintenance contract renews automatically. I know what it means. Moreno set the index down. How did you find this? I found a reference in a misdirected email. Then I found the contract renewal documents in a file I was supposed to be reorganizing. Then I looked up the company registration. On your own. Yes. Did you share what you found with anyone before this week? The bookkeeper. Ruth Hadley. She's been maintaining independent copies for 2 years. I have her full package. Brooke slid the envelope across the table. She also filed the labor board complaint that triggered the audit Grant tried to cover with the statement he wanted me to sign. Moreno looked at the envelope. She didn't open it yet. I need to be straight with you, she said. What you're describing, if it holds together the way your index suggests, this is not a wage theft case anymore. This is a public corruption case, potentially federal, depending on how the infrastructure money was sourced. That changes things. Changes them how? It means it takes longer. It means more scrutiny. It means Grant Holloway is going to have time to work against you while we build it. She paused. And it means that whatever he's already doing to the people around you is going to get worse before it gets better. Brooke held that. I know. You understand that going forward? People are going to get hurt before this is over. Someone already got hurt. She met Moreno's eyes. A 23-year-old kid who was keeping records for me got arrested this morning on a planted evidence charge. A 64-year-old bookkeeper who filed a legitimate complaint is sitting at home right now not knowing if her landlord is next. My wrist is still bruised from where my employer grabbed me in front of 47 witnesses. And the official version of that event is that I had a breakdown. She didn't look away. I know what the cost looks like. I've been watching it accumulate for 18 months. I'm asking you whether the evidence I've brought you is worth opening a case. Moreno held her gaze for a long moment. Then she picked up the manila envelope, broke the seal, and started reading. She read for 22 minutes without speaking. When she stopped, she set the pages down and looked at the window for a moment, and when she looked back at Brooke, her expression had shifted subtly. But enough. This is worth opening, she said. Brooke let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. What do we do now? You go back to Cedar Ridge. You act normal. You don't contact me directly, use the number I'm going to give you, which goes to a line that is not listed anywhere connected to my name. Moreno picked up her legal pad and wrote something, tore off the page, slid it across. The people who are being pressured witnesses, the kid who was arrested, I need them documented. Not just what happened to them. Dates, times, descriptions, ideally recordings. The Hells Angels are, Brooke started. I know about Wade Garrett, Moreno said calmly. I know about the Cedar Ridge chapter. I know he made contact with our office through a referral. She looked at Brooke steadily. They protect witnesses. They don't interfere with the investigation. That's the arrangement. That's already the arrangement. Good. Then we're aligned. She stood, which was clearly the signal that the meeting was ending. One more thing. What? The county hearing. Grant's attorneys have already filed for an emergency session with the county board. They're claiming the labor board complaint is politically motivated, and they want it addressed publicly before the audit proceeds. She watched Brooke's face. He's going to make it about you, publicly, in front of people who matter to him and people who are scared of him. I know. Are you going to attend? Brooke thought about it. About the room full of people who'd watched and said nothing. About Evan in a county lockup. About Ruth sitting alone with her coffee and her certainty. About the 47 people who'd been in that dining room and were already rearranging their memories to match whatever version Grant was selling. If I don't go, she said, he writes the story. Moreno said nothing. She didn't need to. I'll be there, Brooke said. She drove back to Cedar Ridge in the middle of the afternoon, and her phone rang 20 minutes outside town. Wade. Evan's out, he said. The relief came through her chest so fast she almost pulled over. How? His mother had an attorney public defender. Good one. The chain of evidence on the planted cash is already compromised. The locker it was supposedly found in was accessible to 6 other employees and hadn't been locked since Tuesday morning. Attorney flagged it in the arraignment, and the judge ordered a review. He paused. He's shaken, but he's okay. Where is he? At his mom's place. We have 2 people outside. She gripped the wheel. Wade. He asked about you, Wade said. First thing he asked when I talked to him was whether you were okay. She didn't say anything for a moment. Did you tell him? I told him you were the reason the whole thing is moving. There was something quiet in Wade's voice. The kind of quiet that wasn't absence, it was presence. He said he knew that. Said he started keeping records because you told him the truth when you didn't have to. Brooke kept her eyes on the road. Outside Cedar Ridge was getting closer. She could feel it, the specific gravity of a small town that knew too much and said too little, pulling her back in. There's a county hearing, she said. Grant's attorneys filed for it, emergency session. I heard. I'm going. Wade didn't argue. We'll be there. Not to fight, she said immediately. Not to threaten him. Just to be present. I know how to be present. Brooke. She almost smiled at that. Almost. There's something you need to understand before this gets further, she said. About what's in those documents, it's not just wage theft. There's public money, infrastructure contracts, shell company connected to his brother. This is bigger than a restaurant owner shorting his employees. Silence on the line. How much bigger? Wade said. 12 years big, she said. Maybe more. Another silence. Longer this time. He's going to burn it, Wade said. If he figures out how much you actually have, he's not going to try to discredit you. He's going to try to burn the evidence. Moreno has copies. You have copies. Ruth has copies. I've got them distributed to 4 separate locations. She said it with the steadiness of someone who thought about this exact scenario many times. He can try. And the witnesses? That's the weakness. She said it plainly. I can protect documents. I can't always protect people. Denise, Evan, Linda, Ruth. If he goes after them hard enough, he won't. You can't know that, Wade said. But I can make sure they're not alone, which is close enough for now. She turned onto the county road that led into Cedar Ridge. The town rose in front of her, familiar and complicated, the way home always was when home had stopped being simple. Denise called her that evening with news that Holloway's Roadhouse had closed for the weekend routine maintenance, according to the sign on the door, which meant Grant was somewhere with his lawyers, building something. Corey texted her, "My car got keyed tonight," spelled out something bad on the hood. "I'm okay." Linda left a voicemail asking if they were really going to go through with it. Her voice was scared but steady. And Evan sent a single text message at 9:15 that night that she read 3 times in a row. "I still have my notebooks. All of them. Tell me what you need." She set the phone face down on the table and sat in the quiet of her apartment and thought about what Moreno had said that people were going to get hurt before this was over. She thought about what Wade had said, that courage wasn't the absence of fear. She thought about Grant Holloway in a Sunday booth, sliding a piece of paper across a table at a woman he'd decided didn't matter, expecting the world to rearrange itself around his certainty. She thought about all the times before Sunday when she'd walked past something wrong and kept walking because the math of staying safe had seemed more reliable than the math of saying the truth out loud. Then she picked up her phone and called Denise. "Tomorrow morning," she said when Denise picked up. "My place. Bring whatever you have. And call Linda." "All of us?" Denise said. "All of us," Brooke said. "It's time to stop building separately." They met at Brooke's apartment at 7 the next morning. Denise, with a cardboard box she'd been keeping under her bed for 8 months. Linda with a folder of printed schedules she'd saved on instinct without knowing why. Corey with his phone already unlocked, and a camera roll full of dated photographs he'd taken of the tip distribution sheets every Friday for the past 6 weeks because something about the numbers had never added up. Brooke looked at all of it spread across her kitchen table and felt the particular weight of realizing that she had not been alone in this as long as she'd thought she was. These people had been watching the same thing from different angles, collecting the same evidence in different forms, all of them quietly certain that something was wrong, and none of them certain enough that anyone else would believe it. "How long?" she said to Linda. Linda was 51 years old and had been waiting tables at Holloway's for 9 years. She looked at the folder in front of her. "I started keeping the schedules 3 years ago, after Carol Briggs, the elderly waitress Grant had forced to repay money she'd never stolen. Brooke had heard about it before she started working there. It was one of those stories that circulated among the staff in the particular, hushed way of cautionary tales. Don't cross him. Look what he did to Carol. She was 68 and she paid it back out of her Social Security. Carol never fought it, Linda said. Carol was afraid, Denise said. We were all afraid, Corey said. He was the youngest person in the room, and he said it without apology. The way young people sometimes stated the obvious when older people were dancing around it. That's kind of the whole point, isn't it? He built it on people being afraid. Nobody argued with that. Brooke started organizing what they had, not by emotion, by category. Timesheets altered, tip records inconsistent, schedule manipulation. The pattern that emerged when you laid it all flat on a table was the same pattern she'd been looking at for 18 months, except now it had 4 different sets of eyes confirming it from 4 different vantage points inside the same building. This is what Moreno needs, Brooke said. Not just my documentation, all of ours. Independent corroboration. Who's Moreno? Corey said. a federal agent. She looked around the table. She's building a case. But she needs witnesses who are willing to testify. Not just documents, people. The room went quiet. That was the real question. The one that had always been underneath all of it, not whether the evidence was real, but whether the people who carried it were willing to stand up in a room and say so out loud with their names attached, knowing that Grant Holloway and Dale Pruitt and every person Grant had in his pocket would be in that same room watching. "I'll testify," Corey said. He said it fast, before the silence could harden into something else. Linda said nothing for a moment. Then, "My daughter works at the hardware store. Grant owns the building." "I know," Brooke said. "If I testify, I know," Brooke said again. She didn't minimize it. She didn't tell Linda it would be fine, because she didn't know that, and Linda deserved the truth. "I know what it costs. I'm not asking anyone to do something I'm not doing myself. But I need you to know what's at stake if we don't." She looked at each of them in turn. "He's going to do this again. To the next person who questions him, and the one after that." Carol paid it back, and then he did it to someone else. He does it to someone new every time the last one stays quiet. Linda looked at her folder for a long moment. Then she picked it up and set it on Brooke's pile. "Tell me what you need," she said. Grant called a press conference that same morning. Brooke found out from Wade, who texted her a link to a local news clip at 10:15. She watched it on her phone, standing in her kitchen. Grant stood in front of the roadhouse with 2 attorneys flanking him and gave a statement that was, in its construction, genuinely impressive the way a well-made lie was sometimes impressive if you separated the craftsmanship from the content. He talked about a valued restaurant with a long history of community service. He talked about a difficult situation involving a former employee who had been separated from her position for cause following a documented pattern of concerning behavior. He talked about outside agitators, he used that phrase. Outside agitators who had inserted themselves into a private business matter with the clear intention of causing disruption. He did not use the words Hell's Angels. He didn't have to. Everyone watching knew what outside agitators meant in Cedar Ridge. Then he talked about the county hearing. He said he was requesting an emergency session of the county board because the labor board complaint recently filed against his restaurant represented a coordinated harassment campaign driven by people who wanted to damage his family's business for political reasons. He said he looked forward to presenting evidence that would make the facts of the situation perfectly clear. He said Cedar Ridge deserved to know the truth. He said it all with the even, patient tone of a man who had been falsely accused and was handling it with dignity. Brooke watched it twice. She was looking for the seams, the places where the performance slipped and something real showed through. They were there. The way his jaw tightened when he mentioned the labor board. The way his eyes moved slightly to the left before he said documented pattern. Small things. The kind of things you only noticed if you'd watched a man perform for long enough to know what his tells were. She called Moreno. "I saw it," Moreno said before Brooke finished her first sentence. "He's trying to get to the county board before you get to the audit." "I know," which means the timeline accelerates. Moreno sounded neither alarmed nor calm. She sounded like someone doing the math in real time. "The hearing is scheduled for Thursday. I need everything your witnesses have before then. Scanned, dated, organized. I can have that by tomorrow night. I also need Evan, his notebooks specifically, the date-by-date records. He's willing. I talked to him this morning. Good." A pause. "Brooke, the hearing, when he puts you in that room, he's going to come at you with everything. He may have fabricated documents. He may have witness statements from employees who've decided to protect their jobs instead of their conscience. He may have legal maneuvers that temporarily suppress some of what you have. I know. If you go in there, I'm going in there," Brooke said. "Don't try to talk me out of it." Moreno didn't try. "Then we make sure you don't go in alone." The 2 days before the hearing were the fastest and the longest Brooke had ever lived simultaneously. She scanned documents until 2 in the morning. She organized Evan's notebooks into a coherent chronology that told the wage theft story, with the specificity of a man who had written down every number he'd seen for 8 months because Brooke had asked him to, and he'd trusted her enough to do it. She had 3 conversations with Moreno that lasted between 40 minutes and 2 hours, working through the evidence in sequence, identifying the strongest points and the gaps, understanding exactly what the hearing could and couldn't do. And Grant kept moving. Denise's car was vandalized Tuesday night. 2 tires slashed, a crack along the windshield that hadn't been there when she parked it at 6 o'clock. She called Brooke at midnight, and Brooke could hear the specific quality of her voice, not frightened. Exactly. Furious. He thinks this scares me, Denise said. Does it? A pause. It makes me want to walk into that hearing and say every single thing I know louder than I was planning to. Good, Brooke said. That's the right answer. Wade's crew came the next morning and replaced the tires. They didn't announce it. They didn't make it a thing. They showed up at 6 a.m. with the parts and the tools and fixed the car and left before Denise was fully awake, and she texted Brooke afterward. They didn't even leave a bill. By Wednesday afternoon, there were Hell's Angels members parked within a block of every witness's home or workplace. Not conspicuously, not threateningly. Just present visible enough that anyone watching would understand that whatever Grant was paying his people to do, it was going to be observed and documented. Grant's attorney sent Brooke a certified letter Wednesday morning informing her that the restaurant intended to pursue civil litigation for defamation and tortious interference with business operations. Brooke read it twice, handed it to the attorney that Moreno had connected her with a woman named Patricia Holt, who worked out of Harlan and had the particular no-nonsense efficiency of someone who'd seen this specific playbook before. And Patricia read it and set it down and said, "That's a desperation move. He's trying to freeze you. Is it working?" Patricia looked at her over the top of her glasses. "Are you frozen?" "No." "Then it's not working." The county hearing opened at 9 o'clock Thursday morning in a room that was full before 8:30. Brooke had not expected that. She'd expected a sparse official preceding a few county officials, Grant and his attorneys, maybe a local reporter. Instead, the room was packed in the way that only happened in small towns when everyone understood, without anyone explicitly saying so, that something important was happening and that being present for it mattered. She recognized faces from Holloway's. She recognized faces from the parking lot, from the diner on Route 9, from the pharmacy and the gas station and the elementary school where she dropped her nephew off twice last winter. She recognized people who'd heard the story from Grant, and people who'd heard it from someone else, and people who honestly didn't know yet what to think. She sat at the table designated for her side, with Patricia beside her and Denise to her left. Evan was not in the room yet. That was intentional. Grant Holloway sat across the room at the other table with his 2 attorneys and the composed, slightly theatrical stillness of a man who had prepared extensively and believed his preparation was sufficient. Their eyes met once, briefly, when she sat down. Grant looked at her the way he'd looked at her across the booth on Sunday, with the settled confidence of a man who believed the outcome was already determined. His expression said, "You made a mistake, and now I'm going to demonstrate that to everyone in this room." She looked back at him until he looked away first. The county board chair, a man named Harold Getz, who Brooke knew from Ruth's documents, had received 4 years of campaign contributions from Grant's consulting company, called the session to order. He explained that the hearing had been convened to address the labor board complaint and to allow the affected business to present its response before the audit proceeded. Grant's lead attorney, a man named Soren, who had driven up from Nashville and whose suit cost more than Brooke's monthly rent, stood up and began. He was good. She'd expected that. He laid out Grant's version with the smooth authority of someone who'd built courtroom narratives his whole career, the restaurant's history, its community contributions, its employment record. He described Brooke as a disgruntled former employee with a documented performance file, though he didn't specify what was documented or when. He described the labor board complaint as originating from individuals with personal grievances and outside influence And at outside influence, he let his paws do the work of pointing at the hell's angels without saying the word. He talked for 40 minutes. He was precise, credentialed, and entirely constructed. Then he produced the letter. He called it a statement from a current employee who wished to remain anonymous, but whose account directly contradicted the claims in the labor board complaint. He said it established that overtime adjustments at Holloway's Roadhouse had been made voluntarily and with full staff knowledge. Patricia was on her feet before Harold Getz finished looking at it. "I'd like to see the authentication on that document." Soren smiled. "It's a sworn statement from an anonymous source." Patricia held her ground with the ease of someone who'd spent 20 years in rooms like this one. "I'd like to know who swore to it, when, before what notary, and I'd like to verify the notary seal before it's entered into any record." Harold Getz looked uncomfortable. Grant looked at Soren. Soren looked at the document. The notary seal. When Patricia finally got it in her hands and held it under the room's overhead lighting, had a date discrepancy that a second-year law student would have flagged. The ink color of the seal was slightly off from the body of the document. Patricia placed it on the table in front of her and said, very calmly, "This document was prepared after the fact." The room reacted, not loudly in a small-town way, which was the sound of a lot of people shifting in their chairs at the same moment. Grant's expression didn't break. He had reserves. He had more. Soren produced a second document, a security report. He called it from an outside firm. It alleged that internal documents had been removed from Holloway's Roadhouse without authorization. It alleged that this removal had been facilitated by an employee unnamed in coordination with outside parties. It alleged that the evidence being presented by the labor board complainants had been selectively curated and in some cases altered. And then Soren said the thing that Brooke had been waiting for. The move she'd known was coming, but hadn't known the exact shape of until this moment. He said that Holloway's Roadhouse had in its possession a signed confession from an employee admitting to the unauthorized removal and alteration of documents. He said the employee's name was Evan Marsh. He held up a single sheet of paper. The room went very quiet. Brooke looked at the paper. She looked at Grant. His eyes were on her, and for the first time since she'd sat down, she saw something in them that wasn't composed, something that was watching her very carefully, measuring whether she was going to break. She thought about Evan sitting in county lockup with planted evidence in his file. She thought about the arrest that had been designed specifically to produce exactly this, a confession, or at least a document that looked enough like one to work in a room like this one before anyone could verify it. She kept her face completely still. Patricia leaned in close and said in her ear, very quietly, "Stay calm. Look at the door." Brooke looked at the door. It opened. Evan Marsh walked in beside Special Agent Rachel Moreno. He was pale. He looked like someone who hadn't slept in 3 days, which was accurate. He was 23 years old, and he walked into that room like someone who had decided in advance that being afraid wasn't the same as being wrong. And he'd better remember that before he got to the front. He sat down at the table beside Brooke. Grant's composure cracked. Not much a fraction. The kind of crack you only noticed if you were looking for it. His attorney Soren registered it and quickly arranged his expression back to neutral. But it was too late. The room had seen Grant's face in the half-second before he recovered. Moreno sat in the row behind the table. She set a recorder on the seat beside her without drawing attention to it. Harold Getz said, "I wasn't informed." "My client has material testimony relevant to this hearing," Patricia said. "He also has information about the document just entered into evidence that the board needs to hear." This is a public hearing," Patricia said. "My client is a member of the public with relevant information. Unless the board is closing this to witnesses, he has every right to speak." Harold Getz looked at Grant. Grant's jaw was tight. "Proceed," Harold said. Evan's voice shook when he started. That was real, and the room heard it. And that was actually the right thing. Not because weakness was useful, but because a 23-year-old who was genuinely scared and spoke anyway landed differently than someone performing composure. He described what he'd recorded. Month by month, shift by shift, the discrepancies he'd noticed. The hours that disappeared, the tip pool numbers that never matched what came in. He kept his eyes on his notebooks, which were open in front of him, and he read figures from them with the precision of someone who understood was the only thing standing between his testimony and Grant Holloway's resources. Then he talked about the confession. He said that Grant's manager had come to him the week after the arrest and told him that the planted cash charge would go away if he signed a statement taking responsibility for the missing payroll documents. He said the statement had been prepared in advance. He said he'd been told it was just a formality and that signing would make the whole thing easier for everyone. Did you sign it? Patricia asked. No, Evans said. Why not? He looked up from his notebooks for the first time. He looked directly at Grant Holloway. Because I didn't do anything wrong. And because I knew Brooke would find out what actually happened. The statement wasn't dramatic. It was quiet and certain and entirely real. And it landed in the room like something solid being set down. So the document just presented as your confession, Patricia began. I never signed anything, Evans said. Whatever that paper is, it's not mine. Soren was on his feet. The document is authenticated. We'll be requesting forensic authentication, Patricia said. Signature comparison, ink dating, metadata if it's digitized. We'll have our own expert. She looked at Harold Getz. I'd like that document impounded until authentication is completed. Harold Getz looked like a man who understood he was sitting in the middle of something that had grown much larger than the hearing he'd been asked to convene. Noted, he said. Soren leaned to Grant. They exchanged something quiet. Whatever Soren said, Grant's response was brief. Brooke couldn't hear it, but she could see the shape of it, the particular compressed quality of a man trying to control a situation that was sliding out from under him. Then Denise Marks raised her hand. Harold Getz looked at her. This isn't. I have 11 years of documentation, Denise said. She didn't raise her voice. She was 63 years old, and she had the calm of a woman who'd spent her whole career managing heat, literal and otherwise, and nothing in this room was hotter than a commercial kitchen at Friday dinner service. Schedules, tip records, payroll discrepancies. 11 years. She set a folder on the table. I'd like the board to see them. Before Harold could respond, Linda Marsh, no relation to Evans, stood up from the gallery. She was holding her own folder. Then a man named Bobby Salter stood up. He was the cook, whose timesheet Brooke had found first, 18 months ago in a file room, the one with the altered hours in a different ink. He'd left the restaurant 2 years back and moved 30 miles away. And Brooke hadn't known he was coming until she saw him stand. He said, I've got my own records. Then a woman named Grace, who had waitressed at Holloway's until last year, stood up without any folder or file, just herself, and said, he told me if I filed a complaint, he'd make sure I never worked in this county again. I need to say that somewhere official, one by one, not orchestrated, not rehearsed. People who had been carrying pieces of the same thing for different lengths of time, all of them looking at a room that was finally asking them to speak. 6 people stood before Harold Getz called for order. Grant Holloway stood up. He did not consult his attorneys. Soren put a hand on his arm and Grant shook it off. And that single motion, the arm shake, the dismissal of the attorney he'd paid to manage exactly this situation, told Brooke more about where Grant's head was than anything else he'd done in the last hour. He pointed at Brooke. This is a coordinated attack, he said. His voice was controlled, but the edges were wrong, too tight, too fast. This woman and the people she's working with have been systematically building a false case against my family's business. Everything you're hearing was manufactured. The documents were taken without authorization, manipulated, and distributed through a criminal organization, Mr. Holloway, Harold said. And I want it on the record that I know exactly what's happening here. And I want it on the record that every single person in this room who thinks they can come after my family, Mr. Holloway, you need to. Grant's voice rose. I will destroy every one of you. Every one of you who testified here today, I will make sure you never. He was moving. He was actually moving not at anyone in particular, but forward, The specific forward motion of a man whose anger had outpaced his judgment by about 3 sentences, coming around the end of the table toward Brooke's side of the room. Wade Garrett stood up from the second row of the gallery. He didn't move forward. He just stood. But Grant didn't stop. He was pointing at Brooke now, close enough that she could see the particular brightness in his eyes that happened when a man who was used to winning understood on some physical level that he was losing. "You think you know your place," he said. His voice had dropped, which was somehow worse than when it had been loud. "You have no idea what I can." He reached for her arm. Brooke raised her hand. She raised it toward Wade first. A clear, flat palm stop, and Wade, who had taken one step forward, stopped. Then she turned and faced Grant Holloway, who had his hand outstretched toward her in a packed public room in front of a federal agent's recorder and a county board, and 40 witnesses, and whatever courthouse cameras were running. And she let him be exactly where he was for 1 full second before she spoke. Her voice was steady, not loud, not performed, just clear. "My place," she said, "is not beneath you. My place is beside every person you believed was too frightened to speak." Grant's hand dropped, not because she'd moved, not because anyone touched him, because the room had gone so completely, utterly still that the absence of sound became its own kind of pressure. And something in Grant Holloway understood, in the way that certain things were understood before the mind caught up, that he had just done the thing his attorneys had spent 2 days telling him not to do, and he had done it in front of everyone who mattered, and there was no version of the next 60 seconds that made it better. Rachel Moreno stood up from the second row. She produced credentials. She said her name and her title and her field office affiliation. She said that she was placing Grant Holloway under arrest for witness intimidation, evidence tampering, financial fraud, and conspiracy to defraud, and that additional charges were under review, pending completion of the audit now proceeding at the federal level. She said it with the specific measured cadence of someone reading from a list she'd been mentally preparing for a long time. Grant's attorneys were on their feet. Harold Getz was on his feet. Half the room was on its feet. Wade Garrett sat back down. He crossed his arms. He watched. Grant said something to Soren Lowe, urgent, and Soren said something back. And Grant turned and looked at Brooke one final time, and the expression on his face in that last look, before the federal agent reached him, was not rage. It wasn't contempt. It was the specific, blank expression of a man who had spent his entire adult life believing he was the last thing standing between himself and consequences, and had just discovered he was wrong. 2 county officials were detained within the hour. Harold Getz was placed on administrative review. Deputy Angela Reeves, who had been watching from the back of the room, submitted to the federal investigators before she left the building. She had body camera footage, she said, of multiple instances of Grant Holloway interfering with incident reports going back 4 years. She'd been keeping it because she hadn't known what else to do with it and hadn't known who was safe to give it to. Brooke sat at the table long after most of the room had emptied. Patricia was beside her, organizing papers. Denise had gone outside. Evan was talking to Moreno in the corner, methodical, careful, going through the notebooks page by page. At some point, Wade came and sat in the empty chair across the table. He didn't say anything right away. Neither did she. Then he said, "You stopped me, yes. Good call." She looked at her hands. They were steady. She was slightly surprised by that. If you'd moved on him, that's the story. Biker attacks businessman at public hearing. I know. The story had to be him. Not you. Not me stopping him reaching for me in front of a federal recorder. She exhaled. He did it because he couldn't help it. Because somewhere in how he was built, women like me aren't supposed to do what I just did, and he couldn't process it. Wade was quiet for a moment. How'd you know he'd move? She looked up. Because I know what it looks like when someone's never been told no, she said. And I know what it looks like when they're about to find out what it costs. Outside, Cedar Ridge was doing the thing it always did when something significant had happened, absorbing it slowly, processing it in the particular way of a community that had held a truth sideways for a long time and was only now beginning to turn it straight. People were talking in the parking lot. Someone had called a television news crew from the next city over. The Hells Angels were standing at the perimeter in the quiet, present way they'd been standing all week, not inserting, not retreating, just there. Brooke gathered her copies of everything into her bag. She stood. She walked to where Evan was still talking to Moreno, and she put her hand briefly on his shoulder, and he looked up, and she said, "You did good." I was terrified, said, "I know." She held his gaze. That's what made it count. She walked outside into the full weight of a Thursday morning in Cedar Ridge that felt, for the first time in a long time, like it might become something different, not fixed, not finished. Justice didn't work that fast, and she understood that better than anyone in that room. But started. She stood there for a moment, and then Wade came out beside her, and together they watched the parking lot without saying anything. And somewhere in the middle of that silence, Brooke understood something she hadn't quite been able to articulate before. She had not broken Grant Holloway today. Grant Holloway had broken himself on the same thing he'd always underestimated. Not on her anger, not on Wade's presence, not on the federal investigation or the forged documents or the county board. On the simple, stubborn refusal of people he decided didn't matter to keep acting like they didn't. The arrest didn't fix anything overnight. Brooke understood that by Friday morning, when she woke up to 3 missed calls from a number she didn't recognize, a voicemail that said nothing but breathed for 11 seconds before disconnecting, and a text from Corey that said, "Somebody left a dead bird on my doorstep." I know that sounds stupid, but it scared me. It didn't sound stupid. Sounded exactly like what it was, a man with resources and a grudge. And enough people still loyaled him, making sure that everyone who'd stood up Thursday knew the cost wasn't settled yet. Grant Holloway was in federal custody, but his brother Marcus was not. His attorneys were not. The network he'd built over 12 years of strategic favors and calculated intimidation did not dissolve because he'd been arrested in a county hearing room on a Thursday morning. She called Corey back immediately. "Are you okay?" Yeah, he stopped. "Honestly, I'm more angry than scared, which I think means I'm okay." "Good. Take a picture of it. Date and timestamp. Send it to me and send it to this number." She gave him Moreno's contact line. "This is documentation now. Everything is documentation." "Brooke." His voice was quieter. "Is this going to keep happening?" She thought about lying. She thought about the version of this conversation where she said, "It's almost over. It gets better from here. He can't touch you now." All the things that would have made Corey feel better for approximately 48 hours before reality contradicted her. "For a while," she said. "Yes. It's going to keep happening for a while." Silence. "But it's going to happen to people who are not alone," she said, "which is different from how it used to happen." She heard him exhale. "Okay," she said. "Lock your door, go to work. Act like a person who isn't scared. Even if I am, especially then." Patricia called at 8. The news, delivered in her brisk, no extra words way, was that Sorvin had already filed for bail, that Grant's bail hearing was set for Monday, and that given the specific charges and the specific county, there was a real chance he'd be released pending trial. "How real?" Brooke said. "Real enough that we need to be prepared for it." What does prepared look like? It looks like every witness having a clear plan for what they do the moment they see him in this county. It looks like every piece of documentation being in at least 3 separate locations. It looks like not relaxing. Patricia paused. It also looks like understanding that an arrest is not a conviction, and a hearing is not a trial, and we are currently at the beginning of a long process, not the end of a short one. Brooke had known that. She'd known it the whole time, in the abstract way that you knew things before they became real. Now it was real. "How long?" she said. "Could be a year. Could be more. Federal cases. I know how long federal cases take." She pressed her hand flat on her kitchen counter. "He's going to use the time." "Yes, his attorneys will. They'll attack the chain of evidence. They'll argue the documents were obtained improperly. They'll argue your witnesses have personal grievances that compromise their credibility. They'll argue that the Hells Angels' involvement taints the entire case. The club didn't obtain anything. They didn't touch a single document. I know that. You know that. His attorneys are going to argue differently, and some of it will stick with some people, and we need to be ready for that. Another pause. Brooke, how are you doing? Not the case. You. The question caught her off guard. She stood in her kitchen and tried to find an honest answer and came up with, I don't know yet. I think I've been running on something for the past week that isn't going to last forever, and I'd rather figure out what's on the other side of it before it runs out. That's a smart answer, Patricia said. Is it? Most people don't know they're running on adrenaline until it's gone. Grant made bail Monday. Moreno called Brooke at 7 in the morning to tell her before she heard it anywhere else, which was the kind of operational consideration that told Brooke more about Rachel Moreno as a person than anything she'd said in an official capacity. She didn't want Brooke blindsided. She'd found that out and called first. He's out, Brooke said. Not a question. Conditions are significant surrender of passport, no contact with witnesses, GPS monitoring. He violates any of those. He goes back. He's not going to violate them directly. No, Moreno agreed. He's going to work through other people. Same thing he's been doing. So nothing changes. The pressure on witnesses increases, Moreno said carefully, because now he's out and he's watching, and his attorneys are building the narrative for trial. The next several months are going to be the hardest part of this for the people around you. Harder than the hearing. The hearing was one day. This is every day. Brooke thought about Corey and the dead bird on his doorstep. She thought about Linda's daughter working in the building Grant owned. She thought about Ruth, 64 years old, sitting alone in her house with 23 years of complicity. She'd finally decided to stop carrying. What do I do? She said. You keep people together, Moreno said. That's the most important thing right now. The cases that fall apart between arrest and trial fall apart because witnesses stop talking to each other. They get isolated. They start thinking their testimony isn't worth what it's costing them. They withdraw. She let that sit for a moment. You built this coalition. You keep it together. The anonymous calls started that week. Not to Brooke, to the others. Linda got 3 in 2 days. All from different numbers, all with the same basic message. Think about what you're risking. Think about your daughter. Denise got 1 at midnight that she didn't answer. Evan's mother got a visit from a man she didn't recognize who knocked on her door and said he was from the county and needed to verify their address. And when she asked for ID, he said he'd follow up by mail and left, which was not how any legitimate county official worked, and everyone knew it. Brooke found out about each one within hours because she'd asked them all to tell her immediately, and they did, because they'd agreed the only way this held together was if nothing was processed in isolation. She documented everything, every call, every incident, every interaction that felt off. She sent copies to Moreno. She sent copies to Patricia. She kept a running log that she updated every evening, and the act of updating it, reducing each frightening thing to a date, a time, a description helped her treat it as evidence rather than threat, which was the only way she could keep functioning. But some things didn't reduce to documentation. Denise came to her apartment on a Wednesday night and sat at the kitchen table and didn't say anything for almost 5 minutes, which was so unlike Denise that Brooke just made coffee and waited. Finally, Denise said, Ray withdrew his statement. Ray, the daytime manager who'd been standing by the host station the Sunday Grant grabbed Brooke's wrist, the man who'd seen everything and said nothing that day, and then, in the days after, had come forward and made a statement to Moreno about what he'd witnessed. Ray, who had a wife and 2 kids and a mortgage and had been at Holloway's for 14 years. When? Brooke said. This afternoon, he called Patricia directly, said he'd been thinking about it and he wasn't comfortable with how the whole thing was being handled and he wanted to withdraw. Denise wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. His wife works for the county planning office. Brooke sat down across from her. The planning office that processes building permits, Denise said, that Grant's construction projects have run through for the past 8 years. Neither of them said what they were both thinking for a moment. Then Denise said, if he goes, does the whole thing go with him? No, Brooke said. She said it immediately, firmly, Because Denise needed to hear certainty and Brooke needed to practice it. Ray's statement was corroboration. We have Corey, we have Linda, we have the truck driver's dash cam footage. We have the courthouse cameras from Thursday. We have 6 other people who saw what happened that Sunday. His withdrawal hurts, but it doesn't sink us. He was management. His perspective carried weight. I know Brooke. Denise looked at her. Are you afraid that other people are going to do what Ray did? The honest answer was yes. Of course, yes. She was afraid of it every time she went 3 hours without hearing from one of them. Every time someone didn't respond to a text as quickly as usual. Every time she ran through the list of names in her head and tried to assess who was holding and who was starting to calculate whether the cost was still worth it. Every day, she said. Denise nodded slowly. Me too, she picked up her coffee. But I'm not going to do what Ray did. I know you're not. Because this is the thing. Denise set the cup down. I've been working since I was 15 years old. I've cooked in 4 different restaurants. I've worked for good people and bad people. And the thing I've learned is that the bad ones stay in power because the people who know better convince themselves staying quiet is the safer choice. She looked at Brooke directly. Ray thinks he made the safe choice. He didn't. He just traded one kind of risk for another kind. And the kind he chose is the kind that doesn't end when the trial ends. He's going to carry that. Brooke thought about that for a long time after Denise left. She sat in her apartment in the quiet, and she thought about fear specifically, about the version of it she'd been living with for the past 2 weeks, which was different from any fear she'd felt before. This wasn't the sharp, immediate fear of Sunday afternoon when Grant had grabbed her wrist and the plates hit the floor. This was slower, diffuse. The fear of a long process going wrong in ways too incremental to respond to directly. She had nightmares that week. Not about Grant, specifically about documents disappearing. About opening her phone and finding the photographs gone. About standing at a hearing table with nothing in front of her and everyone waiting. She woke from one at 3 in the morning and lay in the dark and did something she hadn't done since this started. She let herself feel the full weight of what she was holding. Not the evidence, the people. Denise and Evan and Corey and Linda and Ruth and even Ray, who had chosen differently, but who she understood. Who she couldn't hate, even though his choice made her job harder. She'd told Corey that things would keep happening to people who were not alone. She'd believed it when she said it. She still believed it. But belief and certainty weren't the same thing. And at 3 in the morning, alone in her apartment, she was operating entirely on belief and nothing else. She picked up her phone and typed a message to Wade. You awake? 3 minutes later, yeah. She called him. He picked up on the first ring. Ray withdrew, she said. I know. Patricia told me. I'm afraid it's going to keep happening. It might, he said. No hedging, no false comfort. I had a nightmare about the evidence disappearing. The evidence is in 6 places. It's not going to disappear. I know that when I'm awake. A pause. Then Wade said, tell me something. What? When you decided to refuse to sign that statement, the moment Grant put the paper in front of you and you decided no, what were you thinking? She thought back to it. The Sunday afternoon, the booth, the paper on the table, the pen. I was thinking that I'd spent 2 years watching him do things that were wrong, and I was tired of being the person who knew and said nothing. That's still true. I know it is. Ray being afraid doesn't change it. Other people being afraid doesn't change it. What you saw, what you documented, what all of those people said in that hearing room, none of that becomes untrue because the process takes longer than a week. She was quiet for a moment. Why did you stay? She said, after the hearing. After the arrest. You don't have a stake in this the way we do. You could have walked away. Because walking away is a choice, he said. Same as staying, and I made my choice a long time ago about which kind of man I was going to be in a room where someone needed someone to stand beside them. He paused. I told you about my sister. I remember. I stayed quiet then. I told myself it was because getting involved would make it worse. I told myself she was handling it. I told myself a lot of things that were easier than the truth, which was that I was making a calculation about my own comfort. His voice was even, no self-pity in it, just the particular steadiness of someone who'd reckoned with something hard and come out the other side still standing. I'm not making that calculation again. She held the phone against her ear in the dark for a long moment. I'm sorry about your sister, she said. She's okay. She built something good. It just took longer than it should have because nobody stood early enough. He paused. Go to sleep, Brooke. Tomorrow's a different day. Is it actually? Every day is, if you make it one. She wasn't sure she fully believed that, but she was sure she was going to try. The case expanded in October. Moreno called Brooke on a Tuesday afternoon with the kind of measured, careful tone that Brooke had learned to read as significant news being delivered, precisely to prevent overreaction. The audit is complete, Moreno said. And 12 years. The wage theft alone covers 63 employees over 12 years, with total underpayment estimated at approximately $400,000. The infrastructure contract, fraud the shell company, the county maintenance funds adds another significant figure. And there are 2 additional county officials now under investigation whose names were not on the documents you originally provided. Brooke sat down. 2 more. One of them is Dale Pruitt, she'd known. Somewhere in the back of her mind, in the place that processed things before the conscious part caught up, she'd known that Pruitt's protection of Grant over the years wasn't just friendship. It was transactional. She'd seen evidence that implied it without being able to prove it directly. Moreno had proven it directly. How? Brooke said. Angela Reeves, Moreno said. Her body camera footage. Over 4 years, she documented 14 instances of Pruitt intervening in incident reports involving Grant Holloway or his affiliated businesses. She submitted everything voluntarily the day of the hearing. It took us 2 months to process it fully, but it's there, Angela Reeves, the deputy who'd come to the roadhouse that Sunday afternoon and looked at Brooke's bruised wrist and made careful calculations in a county where her sheriff was Grant's best friend. She'd done the only thing she could do in that moment, taken the report, gone through the process, not made it worse. And then she'd kept her body camera footage for 4 years, waiting. She was building something too, Brooke said. A lot of people were, Moreno said, separately. None of them with enough to act alone. That was the thing that would stay with Brooke longest, not the evidence itself, but the realization of how many people had been watching the same wrong thing from different positions, each one alone, each one holding a piece that only mattered when it was connected to all the other pieces. Angela in her patrol car, Ruth in the back office, Evan with his notebooks, Grace, who'd stood up at the hearing with no folder and no documentation, just herself and the memory of a threat. All of them isolated by the same system. Grant had built a system that worked precisely because it kept people from finding each other. What happens to Pruitt? Brooke said. He's been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Criminal charges are likely. Moreno paused. I know that's complicated for you. It was complicated because Pruitt wasn't a monster. He was a man who'd made a series of small choices over many years, each one defensible in isolation, each one a little more compromising than the last, until he'd become something that couldn't be defended at all. She didn't hate him. She understood how it happened. Understanding it didn't make it less wrong. No, she said. It's not complicated. He knew what Grant was doing, and he protected him. That's what it is. The trial date was set for spring. Brooke found out that 3 of the employees, who had initially been reluctant to testify, had reconsidered in the months since the hearing, not because the intimidation stopped, because it didn't entirely, but because they'd watched Brooke and Denise and Evan continue to function, to work, to live, and the narrative that Grant's people had been pushing, that cooperating with the case would make your life impossible, had stopped matching what they were actually seeing. One of them called her directly. A woman named Sharon, who'd worked breakfast shift at the Roadhouse for 6 years and had been pressured twice in October to withdraw from any involvement in the case. She called Brooke on a November evening and said, I want to testify. Tell me what you have, Brooke said. What Sharon had was 2 years of Sunday morning tip records she'd photographed on her phone. For the same reason Brooke had photographed documents, because something was wrong and she didn't know what else to do with the knowledge. She'd never told anyone. She hadn't known who to tell. You tell Moreno, Brooke said. And then you tell me if anyone contacts you. And then you go to work Monday morning and you act like a person who has decided she's done being afraid. What if I'm still afraid? Then you act like one anyway. She heard Sharon smile on the other end of the line. You sound like my grandmother. Your grandmother sounds smart. Wade found her at the diner on Route 9 in early December, which had quietly become their place to table by the back wall. Coffee without being asked, enough distance from the rest of the room to talk plainly. How are you sleeping, he said. Better, she said. And it was true. The nightmares had mostly stopped, replaced by a specific kind of tired that was less fear and more the sustained effort of being the person that everyone else was looking to. How's the chapter? Good. He turned his coffee cup. There's been some talk in town. What kind of talk? Good kind. Mostly. People who were scared of us, or at least had opinions about us, who've adjusted those opinions. He said it without pride, just as observation. Being present for something that mattered changed some calculations. It should change calculations, Brooke said, because it should have. What you did, what the club did, wasn't nothing. We didn't do anything dramatic. You showed up every day, she said. You stood outside witnesses' homes at 3 a.m. You fixed Denise's car. You found Evan at that service station when nobody else was looking. She looked at him. That's not nothing. That's actually everything. Because the thing that makes intimidation work is making people feel like they're facing it alone. You made sure they weren't. Wade was quiet for a moment. I want to ask you something, he said. And you don't have to answer. Okay, do you regret any of it? Not the outcome, the cost, the year, the nightmares, the phone calls, the people who withdrew, Ray. He looked at her steadily. If you'd known on that Sunday afternoon exactly what it was going to take, would you still have said no to signing the statement? She didn't answer immediately. She let the question sit in its full weight, the job, the eviction pressure, the bruised wrist, the nightmares, the dead bird on Corey's doorstep, Ray's face in her memory, the midnight calls, the months of carrying it. Yes, she said. Why? She thought about Carol Briggs, the elderly waitress who'd repaid money she'd never stolen, and then said nothing, and then Grant had done it to someone else. She thought about Evan at 23, keeping notebooks in his apartment because a woman he barely knew had told him the truth and he'd decided to trust it. She thought about Angela Reeves, 4 years of body camera footage, waiting, because the alternative, she said, is that he keeps doing it to the next person who can't afford to fight back, and the one after that. She wrapped her hands around her cup. I didn't say no because I was brave. I said no because I'd run out of ways to tell myself that looking the other way was the same as not knowing. Wade nodded slowly. You know what I think? He said. What? I think Grant Holloway made one mistake that was bigger than all the others combined. What was that? He thought the people he was hurting were small. He looked at her steadily. He never figured out that small and quiet aren't the same thing. The trial began in April. By the time it did, Brooke had testified before a federal grand jury twice, been deposed by Grant's defense attorneys for 11 hours over 2 days, received a civil lawsuit threat that Patricia dealt with in 2 weeks, watched 2 more county officials plead guilty to charges related to the shell company contracts, and attended a meeting with 6 other former Holloway's employees who had come forward late and were now part of the expanding case. She testified at trial on a Thursday in the 3rd week of proceedings. She wore the same jacket she'd worn to the federal building in Harlan the first time she met Rachel Moreno. She sat in the witness chair and looked at the jury. 12 people who had nothing to do with Cedar Ridge, who had no stake in the outcome except truth. And she answered every question Patricia had prepared her for, and every question from Grant's defense team that had been designed to make her seem small. She was not small. She was not performing courage. She was not suppressing fear. She was simply a woman who had spent 18 months building something careful and true, and who was now in the room where it was finally allowed to matter. And nothing, Grant's attorney said, changed what was in those documents, or what she'd seen, or what 47 people had watched happen on a Sunday afternoon in a crowded roadhouse. Grant's attorney asked her, near the end of cross-examination, whether she admitted that she had taken documents from a private business without authorization. She said, "I photographed documents that I had legitimate access to as part of my job duties. That recorded illegal activity directed at me and my coworkers. But you removed them. I preserved evidence of crimes." She kept her voice steady. "I did it because I understood what was happening, and I understood that the people responsible for investigating it were the same people being paid to protect the man committing it." The attorney tried twice more. She answered both times with the same precision, not aggressive, not defensive, simply clear. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Brooke did not wait at the courthouse. She went home. She cooked dinner. She called Denise. She sent Evan a text that said, "However this goes, what you did was right." He wrote back, "I know, still nervous." She wrote back, "Me too, normal." Patricia called her at 11:15 on a Friday morning. "Guilty," she said. "All counts." Brooke sat down on the kitchen floor. Not dramatically, she was just suddenly very aware that she'd been standing for a very long time, and it was okay now to stop. "All of them," she said. "Every count." The jury came back unanimous on the wage theft, the fraud, the intimidation, the conspiracy. Unanimous. Patricia's voice, always professionally level, had something warm in it now. Something earned. "The sentencing hearing is in 60 days. Brooke sat on her kitchen floor for a while after that call ended. She thought about the statement Grant had slid across the table to her over a year ago. 8 names. A pen. The assumption that she would do what she was told, because men like him had always gotten what they wanted from women like her. She thought about how close she'd come to signing it, not because she'd been tempted, she hadn't, but because she'd sat there for a full second before refusing, long enough to understand exactly what refusing meant, long enough to do it anyway, that second. Everything that followed, every person who came forward, every document preserved, every phone call made, every night spent updating a log of incidents that needed to be treated as evidence rather than fear. All of it had fit inside that 1 second on a Sunday afternoon when a woman with a bruised wrist and 18 months of quiet preparation chose, very deliberately, which version of herself she was going to be. She got up off the kitchen floor. She called Wade. "Guilty on all counts," she said when he picked up. She heard something on the other end, not a sound exactly. More the quality of a long exhale, the particular release of someone who'd been holding something careful and tight for a very long time. "All right," he said. "All right," she said back. Then, "Wade, thank you. You did it, Brooke." "We did it," she said. "Don't do that thing where you minimize what you did." A pause. Then, "Okay, we did it." She stood in her kitchen in Cedar Ridge, Tennessee, with the sun coming through the window and the particular quiet of an ordinary Friday morning that had just become something else, something she was going to carry forward for the rest of her life. Grant Holloway had told her to know her place. She did. She always had. Grant Holloway was sentenced on a Wednesday morning in June, and Brooke was not in the courtroom when it happened. That was a choice she'd made deliberately, the way she'd made most of the important choices in the past 18 months, slowly. Then, with complete certainty. Patricia had told her she could be there. Moreno had told her she had every right to be there. Denise had offered to drive her. She'd said no to all of it. "Why?" Denise had asked the night before, sitting across from her at the kitchen table, with coffee going cold between them the way it always did when they talked about things that mattered. "Because I've spent 14 months making this about the truth," Brooke said. "Not about him. Not about watching him receive a consequence. If I sit in that courtroom tomorrow, the last image I have of this whole thing is Grant Holloway's face when they read the sentence." She shook her head. "I don't want that to be the last image." Denise looked at her for a long moment. "What do you want the last image to be?" Brooke thought about it. "I want to be somewhere useful when it happens." So on the Wednesday morning, that Grant Holloway stood before a federal judge and was sentenced to 9 years in federal prison, plus restitution, totaling just over $800,000 to be distributed among 63 former and current employees. Brooke Dalton was at a folding table in the back room of what used to be Holloway's Roadhouse, helping a woman named Sharon organize payroll records for the new employee-owned cooperative that was taking over the lease in 30 days. Patricia called her at 10:47. 9 years, she said. Full restitution. The judge cited the scope of the intimidation campaign and the specific targeting of vulnerable workers as aggravating factors. Brooke set down the folder she was holding. Marcus pleaded guilty last week, I told you. 18 months, supervised release, full cooperation with recovery of county funds. The two additional officials both pleaded, both cooperating. Patricia paused. Dale Pruitt is going to trial separately in September. The DA is confident. Angela's testimony? 4 years of documented interference. It's solid. Another pause. Brooke, it held. The whole thing held. She sat down in the folding chair beside the table. Sharon looked over from across the room and read her expression and put her hand over her mouth and said, 9 years. 9 years, Brooke said. Sharon sat down on the floor right where she was standing. Not dramatically the same way Brooke had sat down on her kitchen floor the day the verdict came in. Just suddenly, the floor was the right place to be. They sat like that for a minute, the two of them in different parts of the room, and the building was quiet around them. And Cedar Ridge was going about its Wednesday outside. And somewhere in a federal courthouse, a man who had told a woman to know her place was discovering what his place was going to look like for the next 9 years. Then Sharon said, "What do we do now?" And Brooke said, "We go back to work." The restitution checks went out over 3 months, administered through the court and distributed by a third-party accountant that Moreno had recommended. Patricia handled the legal mechanics. Brooke handled something harder, making sure people who hadn't come forward during the trial, people who'd been too afraid or too exhausted or too convinced nothing would come of it, knew they were still eligible to file claims. She drove to 4 different addresses in the county. She knocked on doors. She sat in people's kitchens and explained the process in plain language and answered the same questions over and over without ever making anyone feel slow for asking them. Some of the people she visited had worked at Holloway's years ago and had most stops was thinking about the wages that had vanished because thinking about it hadn't changed anything. Now it did. A woman named Carla had been there 14 years back, owed $1,100 in underpaid overtime. She was 62 now and worked part-time at a grocery store and had a granddaughter she was helping raise. She looked at Brooke across her kitchen table and said, "I thought it was just how things worked." "I know," Brooke said. "A lot of people thought that. He made you feel like if you questioned it, you were the problem." "Yes." "How did you not believe that?" Brooke considered it. "I almost did," she said. "There was a long time when I wasn't sure if I was seeing something real or if I was just angry. The difference between those two things matters." She looked at Carla directly. "What made it real was the documents. You can't argue with what's written down." Carla filed her claim. $1,100 plus interest came back to her 4 months later. She called Brooke when the check arrived. She didn't say much. She just said, "Thank you. I didn't think anyone was going to come knock on my door about this." "Someone should have come sooner," Brooke said. The reopening happened on a Saturday in late August. The lease had transferred to the employee cooperative in July, a legal structure that Patricia helped them build, that Moreno had connected them with resources to fund, that Ruth Hadley had helped design from the financial side with the particular competence of a woman who had spent 23 years understanding exactly how a restaurant's money moved and was now, for the first time, in a position to make it move honestly. They called it the open table. Brooke had not chosen the name alone. They'd had a meeting, all of them, the full group that had come together over the past year. Denise, Evan, Linda, Corey, Grace, Bobby Salter, who'd driven in from 30 miles away because he wanted to be part of what came next, and 6 others who joined the cooperative from inside the old staff or from outside it. They'd written names on a whiteboard and voted and argued and voted again. And the open table had come out of it, not because it was the cleverest name, but because it was the most accurate one. The door was open. The table was for everyone. The morning of the reopening, Brooke stood in the kitchen at 5:30, watching Denise organize her prep station with the focused efficiency of someone who had been doing this exact thing for 30 years and intended to keep doing it for 30 more. Denise didn't look up, but she said, "Stop watching me work and go do something useful. I'm taking it in. Take it in faster. We open in 3 hours." Brooke smiled and went to the front. The dining room looked the same and completely different in ways that were hard to articulate to someone who hadn't spent 3 years navigating it under a different regime. The tables were the same tables. The bar was the same bar. But something in the quality of the air had changed, or maybe the quality of the people moving through it. The specific ease of people doing their jobs without calculating what they were allowed to say or ask or question. She set the tables herself that morning. All of them. Not because it needed to be her, they had staff for that, but because she wanted to. Because there was something in the physical act of setting a table that connected back to the beginning of all of this, to carrying trays and pouring coffee, and the dignity of honest work that didn't diminish you when you did it in a place that respected it. Corey came in at 6 and found her on the third table and said, "You know we have a setup crew." "I know. Are you going to be one of those managers who does everyone's job?" "I'm going to be a manager who knows how every job feels," she said. "That's different." He grabbed the other side of the table and helped her straighten the cloth. "You're still going to wait tables sometimes, aren't you?" "Several mornings a week." He shook his head. But he was smiling. "That's either extremely humble or slightly insane." "Probably both," she said. Evan arrived at 7 with 2 things: a box of accounting supplies and his acceptance letter to the community college's business program, which he'd been accepted to 2 weeks earlier and hadn't told anyone because he'd been superstitious about saying it out loud before it felt real. He set both things on the counter and stood there. And Brooke looked at the letter and then at him and said, "When did this come? 2 weeks ago." "Evan, I know." "I know." He picked the letter back up and folded it carefully. I didn't want to make it a thing until it felt, it is real. I know that now." He tucked the letter in his jacket pocket, close to him. "I'm going to study accounting, specifically forensic accounting." He said it with the particular quiet of someone who'd made a decision that was partly professional and partly personal in ways they didn't feel like unpacking all at once. "I figure I know what it looks like when the numbers are wrong. Might as well make something out of that." Brooke looked at him, 23 years old, notebooks that had helped put a man in federal prison, a letter of acceptance in his jacket pocket, and a clarity of purpose that some people spent their whole lives searching for without finding. "You're going to be very good at it," she said. "You think?" "I think you've been doing it for a year and a half without the credential," she said. "The credential is just going to make it official." Wade came in at 9 with 3 other members of the Cedar Ridge chapter. No fanfare, no announcement. They came in the way regular customers came in, pulled out chairs, sat down, picked up menus they didn't strictly need to read. Brooke came out of the kitchen and saw them and walked over. "You're early," she said. "We're always early for things that matter," Wade said. She sat across from him for a moment. The restaurant was still pre-opening quiet, staff moving around in the purposeful way of people who knew what they were doing and why. "How does it feel?" Wade said. She looked around the room. "Different. It feels like mine, like ours, in a way it never did before. And that's strange to say about a place I've been working in for 3 years. Ownership changes how a place feels. Not just the legal kind," she said. "The kind where the people in the building actually matter to the operation. Where nobody's running calculations about what they're allowed to say." She met his eyes. "You were in here every Sunday." "I was. When it was Grant's place." "When it was Grant's place," he confirmed. "Did you know what was happening?" He thought about it honestly, which she'd come to understand was the only way he answered questions. "I knew something was off. The way staff moved around him. The way people didn't make eye contact with management. You can feel that kind of thing if you've been in enough rooms." He paused. "I didn't know the specifics. I knew enough to be paying attention. And then I walked in that Sunday and saw your wrist and the plates on the floor, and I didn't need specifics anymore." She nodded. You asked me what I wanted before you did anything. That's the only way it works, he said. People who take over a rescue end up with a different kind of problem than the one they started with. Wade. She leaned forward slightly. I want to say something, and I need you to hear it the way I mean it. Okay, what you did, what the chapter did, it changed this town. Not just the case, not just the outcome. The way people in Cedar Ridge think about what you are and what you stand for. She held his gaze. That matters. And it matters that you did it without making it about you. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, she could hear Cedar Ridge waking up, the particular sound of a Saturday morning. Unhurried, the town moving at its own pace. We have a table here now, he said. You do, corner spot reserved, standing reservation. She sat back. There's a plaque going on it today. He looked at her. What does it say? For those who refuse to look away. Something moved across his face that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite something else. It was the particular expression of a man who'd done a hard thing for the right reasons and been seen for it, not celebrated, not thanked extravagantly, just genuinely seen. She'd learned that was what it looked like when it was real. All right, he said. All right, she said back. The opening went the way things went when they were built on something solid, not perfectly, not without the small disasters of any first day, but with the particular resilience of a place that had people in it who knew how to handle problems without panic, because they'd handled problems that were considerably worse. The kitchen fired an order wrong twice in the first hour. Denise corrected it without raising her voice, which was itself a small revolution compared to what kitchen culture had looked like under the previous management. A customer complained about wait time, and Corey handled it with the specific grace of someone who'd spent a year learning that customer service and self-respect weren't mutually exclusive. The new transparent tip distribution, posted on the wall beside the service station, updated weekly, accessible to every employee, drew more attention from curious first-day customers than anything else in the room. Why do you post that? One of them asked Brooke. So everyone who works here knows exactly what they're owed, she said. And so everyone who comes here knows we run an honest place. The woman looked at the board for a moment. Then she said, I've been eating at this restaurant for 12 years, and I never thought about where the tip went. Most people don't, Brooke said. That's how it was able to disappear. Rachel Moreno came in at noon. She wasn't in Cedar Ridge, officially. She'd driven from the field office because she'd wanted to see it. She said, the thing that had come out of the other side of the case. She sat at a table near the middle of the room and ordered the lunch special and ate it without ceremony. Just a woman having a meal in a restaurant on a Saturday. When Brooke stopped at the table between rushes, Moreno said, I've been doing this work for 15 years. How many cases like this one? None exactly like this one. She wrapped her hands around her water glass. Most cases like this one, the evidence is there, and nobody can hold it together long enough. People withdraw. Documents disappear. The witnesses stop talking to each other, and the case dies in the space between what happened and what anyone's willing to say out loud. She looked around the room. You held it together. We held it together. Moreno acknowledged that with a small nod. I've been using the Cedar Ridge case as a training reference, specifically the documentation methodology. The way you built independent corroboration across multiple witnesses without them initially knowing what the others had. I didn't plan it that way, Brooke said. I just told people the truth when they asked. And then they started keeping their own records. That's what I use it to teach, Moreno said. That's the part that's hardest to replicate and most important. You told people the truth. That's what made them trust the process enough to participate in it. Brooke thought about that later. After the lunch rush, when she was sitting in the back room for 20 minutes between because Denise had physically pointed at her and said, you, sit, eat something. She sat and ate and turned Moreno's words over. She'd told people the truth. That was it. That was the whole mechanism. In a situation engineered specifically around the suppression of truth-falsified documents, coerced silence, manufactured reputations, the most subversive thing she'd done was simply keep saying what she knew was real and letting other people decide whether they could afford to say it too. Most of them, eventually, had decided they could. The afternoon brought the moment she hadn't planned for. She was on the floor, actually waiting tables, four top near the window. Family she didn't recognize when a young woman came in alone and stood near the host station with the particular body language of someone who needed something but wasn't sure they'd be believed if they asked for it. Brooke saw her from across the room. She handed her order pad to Corey and walked over. The young woman was maybe 25, dark circles under her eyes. Holding her bag, the way people held things when they were nervous too tight, slightly in front of them. "Can I help you?" I was told. She stopped. Started again. "Someone told me I could come here. That there's a person here who helps with if your employer is." She stopped again. "Come sit down," Brooke said. She took her to the back room, the one that had been set aside specifically for the meeting space, the advocacy room. The place where the sign on the door said simply, "If you need to talk, you're welcome here." She made coffee. She sat across from the young woman and she waited. "My employer has been withholding wages," the woman said finally, "for about 6 months. It started small and I thought it was mistakes, but they're not mistakes. I've been keeping records." She reached into her bag and pulled out a notebook spiral bound, the same kind Evan had used, and set it on the table. Brooke looked at the notebook. Something moved through her that was too complicated to name, not quite the past and not quite the present, but both of them in the same moment. The particular feeling of watching something she'd learned turn into something she could give. "Tell me your employer's name," she said. "He manages 3 restaurants in the county. Everyone's afraid of him." She looked at her notebook. "He told me if I said anything, he'd make sure I never worked in food service again. He said everyone in this area knows him." "He might be right that everyone knows him," Brooke said. "That doesn't mean what he did to you is invisible." She met the young woman's eyes. "What's your name?" "Jess." "My name is Brooke. I'm going to get someone else who needs to hear this. His name is Evan. He understands documentation better than almost anyone I know, and then the 3 of us are going to go through that notebook together." She held the young woman's gaze with the steadiness of someone who'd learned exactly what that kind of steadiness was worth to someone sitting across a table feeling alone. "You're not going to walk out of this room without a plan, and you're not going to fight this by yourself." Jess looked at her for a moment. Her grip on the notebook loosened slightly. "Why are you doing this?" Brooke thought about the question, really thought about it. The honest version. "Because someone stood beside me when I needed it," she said. "And standing beside people when they need it is what this place is for now." She went and got Evan, who came immediately, notebooks and all competence, already switched on before he'd fully sat down. She texted Wade, "New case, initial meeting. You should know." He wrote back within 2 minutes, "I'll make sure she has eyes on her place tonight." She wrote, "Thank you." He wrote, "That's what we do." She went back to the floor because the dinner rush was starting, and Denise needed everyone on deck. And as she moved between tables, with the easy, practiced rhythm of someone who'd been carrying trays for 15 years, she understood something she'd been circling for months without quite landing on. This was what justice looked like when it kept going. Not the verdict, not the sentence, not the restitution checks, or the guilty pleas or Grant Holloway's face when they read 9 years into a federal courtroom. Those things mattered. They were real and necessary and hard-won, but they were the beginning of the shape, not the shape itself. The shape was this: a restaurant that ran honestly, a young woman in the back room with a notebook, a 23-year-old accountant who knew what wrong numbers looked like, a 64-year-old bookkeeper who'd finally put down a weight she'd been carrying for 2 decades, a motorcycle club's corner table with a plaque on it that said something true. The shape was the continuity, the fact that it kept going. Wade was still at the corner table at 7, the dinner rush moving around him with the comfortable ease of a man who'd spent enough time in a place to know how to sit inside its rhythm without interrupting it. One of the other members had left. He was alone now, coffee in front of him, watching the room with the particular attention he gave to everything not surveillance, just presence. Brooke came and sat across from him for 10 minutes between the dinner rush and the cleanup. She was tired in the specific clean way of physical work, done well, the kind of tired that felt like accomplishment rather than depletion. "How's the new one?" he said. He meant Jess. "Scared. Smart. Has 6 months of records." Brooke looked at the table surface. "It's the same thing. Different name, different employer, same mechanism. Make people feel small. Make them feel alone. Count on the fear doing the work. Are we going to help her?" "Yes." "Good." He picked up his coffee. "How long do you think before she's okay?" "Depends on what she decides to do with what she knows," Brooke said. "Could be weeks, could be a year, could be longer." She looked at him. "The timeline matters less than the direction." He nodded slowly. "Wade," she looked at him. "Do you remember what you said to me the night I called you at 3 in the morning after Ray withdrew?" "I remember. You said every day is different if you make it one." "I did say that. I didn't fully believe it then. Do you believe it now?" She looked around the room at Denise, visible through the kitchen pass-through, moving with the settled authority of a woman in her own kitchen. At Corey, wiping down a table with the easy confidence of someone who'd learned that doing your job well and standing up for yourself weren't in conflict. At Sharon, behind the bar, counting the tip pool into the distribution log, the numbers accurate and visible and real. At the corner table with its plaque catching the light. "Yes," she said, "I believe it now." She stood. She picked up the coffee cups. She was going back to the floor because there were tables to clear, and Denise needed help with the close, and Jess was still in the back room with Evan, and all of it needed tending. All of it needed the ordinary, continuous, unglamorous work of keeping something real alive. She'd been told to know her place once, by a man who believed her place was beneath him. He'd been wrong about that in ways he was spending 9 years understanding. Her place was here at the center of a community that had learned, at enormous cost, what it meant to stand together. Her place was beside the woman in the back room with the spiral notebook and the scared eyes and the 6 months of careful documentation that proved she hadn't imagined what had been done to her. Her place was in the work, the honest daily work, the kind that didn't diminish you when the place you did it respected who you were. Wade watched her go back to the floor. He watched her move between tables with the ease of someone exactly where they belonged. He thought about the Sunday afternoon, more than a year ago, when he'd walked into a restaurant and seen a woman standing over broken plates with a bruised wrist and made the decision to ask her what she wanted instead of deciding for her. He hadn't rescued her. He'd stood beside her long enough for her to remember what she already knew. That was the only kind of help that ever actually held. Outside, Cedar Ridge was settling into a summer Saturday night, the specific, unhurried ease of a small town that had been through something and come out the other side, not unscathed, but not broken either. Changed. The kind of change that didn't reverse, that settled into the bones of a place and became part of what it was. Inside the open table, the light was warm and the food was good and the numbers on the tip board were honest and the door was open. And Brooke Dalton was carrying a tray across the room, not because she had to, not because she couldn't do anything else, but because this was her place, chosen and claimed and entirely her own. And she had never once in her life been willing to let anyone take that from her. That was the truth Grant Holloway had never understood about the woman he'd told to know her place. She had always known it. She had simply been waiting for the right moment to make sure everyone else knew it too.